She ran toward the fire while everyone else ran away. He was a stranger gasping for breath on an office floor, minutes from losing everything. She never asked his name. She just grabbed him and ran. Neither of them knew that night would rewrite two lives already tangled in ways neither could imagine. What happens when a debt of survival turns into something far more dangerous and far more beautiful? Guys, before I continue, I need to ask for your help. This channel doesn't generate any revenue for me anymore. I don't make any money from these videos, but I have an incredible team that works every week to bring you quality content, and I want to keep that going. That's why I created Allure TV, an app with narrated stories, uncensored, unedited, and ad-free. Things that this platform would never allow here. There's new content every day of the week, and you can listen to it in multiple languages or read it if you prefer. The link is pinned in the comments, or just point your camera at the QR code that's on the screen right now. Help us keep the channel active. I'm truly grateful. Help us keep the channel active. The alarm blinked red, died, came back as static, then nothing. That nothing was the part Camilla remembered later. Not the smell, not even the heat, just how quiet the building got, right before it tried to kill someone. She'd been crossing the lobby with a coffee going cold in her hand when the first ribbon of smoke slid down the stairwell. Thin, almost polite, like it was asking permission before it turned into something else entirely. It didn't ask twice. Everyone out. Now, move. She was already waving people toward the doors, and for a second nobody moved, the way people don't when their brain hasn't caught up to their eyes yet. Then the design team spilled out of the second-floor studio, someone's phone already up filming instead of running, and the panic finally clicked into gear. Camilla didn't go with them. She turned toward the stairs. Just turned. No debate in her head. Or if there was one, it lost before it started. 3 years in that building teaches you things nobody puts in an orientation packet. Which floor runs hot in July? Which door sticks if you don't lift the handle first? Whose office light stays on long after the cleaning crew's gone home? She knew, not hoped, knew that somebody was still up on 4. Camilla, what the hell are you doing? Mariana caught her sleeve, nails digging in. Lights on. 4. She was already pulling free. Someone's still in there. You don't know that. I do. She didn't. Not really. She just wasn't going to be wrong about it from the ground floor. She hit the stairs 2 at a time, blazer catching on the railing, scarf yanked up over her nose more out of habit than any real plan. The 3rd floor landing is where the heat stopped being weather and started being something with intent. It grabbed at her wrists, her throat, dared her to turn around. She didn't. Hello? Anyone in here? Her voice cracked, and the smoke just ate it, swallowed it whole somewhere behind the walls where something low and mean was still growing. Nothing answered. Just the building itself, groaning, settling in ways buildings aren't supposed to settle while people are still inside them. 4th floor, she went down to her hands and knees. Smoke doesn't care how brave you're trying to be. It still sits along the ceiling like it's got all night. Her eyes wouldn't stop watering. Somewhere past the second stinging breath, she stopped counting how much this hurt, and just kept crawling toward a strip of amber light under a half-open door. Glass door, brushed steel handle. The kind of door that belongs to someone who runs the place, not someone who clocks in. That's when she saw him. He was on the floor near a chair that had tipped over sideways, jacket scorched up one arm, and above him, absurdly, uselessly, his laptop was still on, still glowing like none of this concerned it. He wasn't moving. Hey, hey! She grabbed his shoulders and shook, harder than she meant to, hard enough her own hands would ache later. Nothing. She pressed 2 fingers under his jaw. There. A pulse. Weak, but stubborn about it. Okay. Not to him, to herself mostly. Okay, you don't get to die on me. He was heavier than he looked. Most unconscious people are, she'd learn that later too. And for one bad second she genuinely didn't know if her arms would hold. Then something took over that wasn't quite courage, more like refusal. She hooked her arms under his and started dragging, his shoes scraping the concrete, her shoulder screaming somewhere around the 2nd step. The stairwell had gotten worse while she was gone. Smoke had gone black, oily, low enough now that breathing meant ducking her whole head down near his. 12 steps to the landing. She counted them without meaning to. 12, then 12 more, because counting was easier than thinking about what happened if her legs gave out first. Come on, half to him, mostly to her own body at this point. Come on, come on. Something cracked above them, loud, like the building had finally exhaled. She didn't look up. Looking up cost a second, and she didn't have one to spare. By the second floor, her arms weren't really arms anymore, just numb weight doing a job. By the ground floor, there were voices, real ones, people, someone shouting her name from somewhere on the other side of all that smoke. She's here, she's got someone. Hands were on her before she'd even fully cleared the door, taking his weight off her before she could argue about it. She stumbled out, and the air hit her like something physical. Cold, clean, wrong in the best way. The sky wide and grey above her instead of a ceiling about to come down. She went down on her knees on the sidewalk. Didn't decide to. Just did. Coughed until her ribs hurt, barely registering the paramedics running past her toward the man she'd just hauled out of a building that had tried very hard to keep him. "Miss, can you hear me?" Someone crouched next to her, a hand steady on her shoulder. "I'm fine," her voice said otherwise. "Check him. Is he breathing?" "He's breathing." A pause. "Because of you." She turned her head, just enough to watch them lift him onto the stretcher. Face slack. Soot streaked across one cheek. A total stranger. She'd never seen him before, not once, not in 3 years in that building. And still, watching his chest rise, fall, rise again, something settled low in her chest, like a stone dropped into still water. Small. Rippling out further than it had any right to. "Wait!" She was pushing herself up. Weak, useless. "Wait, who is—" The doors shut. The siren rose. Whatever she'd meant to ask went with it. Mariana dropped a jacket over her shoulders, hands shaking worse than Camilla's own. "You could have died in there, you know that, right?" Camilla didn't answer right away. She watched the ambulance's lights shrink into the haze, carrying off a face she already suspected she wasn't going to forget. "I know," she finally said. I couldn't leave him there." What she didn't say, couldn't have explained, not to Mariana, not even to herself yet, was the strange certainty sitting under her ribs, that this wasn't over, that somewhere in that smoke, tangled up in fear and instinct and 12-counted steps, something had started that wasn't going to just stop because the fire did. She didn't know his name. She had no way of knowing that across town, in a hospital bed, he'd wake up in a few hours thinking of nothing else but the feeling of her hands. The first thing Tiago registered was sound, a monitor, steady, too steady, beeping in a rhythm that felt like it belonged to someone else's chest. Then smell, antiseptic, cold plastic, and underneath that, faint, something that had no business being in a hospital room at all. Smoke, still sitting at the back of his throat every time he swallowed. "Mr. Andrade, can you hear me?" He opened his eyes to fluorescent light and a nurse's face too close to his own, and for a second none of it lined up right. The tube taped under his nose, the IV line, a ceiling that was definitely not his office ceiling. "Where?" His voice came out wrecked. Barely a voice. He coughed and something deep in his chest lit up with an ache he didn't recognize. "Santa Clara Hospital. There was a fire in your building. You inhaled a lot of smoke, but you'll be fine." She checked something on the monitor without looking at him, already halfway to the door in her head, if not her feet. Just another Tuesday, probably. Fire. The word landed strange, disconnected from anything he could actually reach. He remembered his desk, the reports he'd been going through, a tightness in his throat he'd chalked up to another late night. After that, nothing. A gap where an hour of his life used to be. "Someone got me out?" His own voice dropped into something quieter than he meant it to. "A young woman, from what I heard, pulled you down 4 flights before the fire department even showed up." She said it like a fact she was filing away, not a miracle. "You're lucky. Most people don't do that for a stranger." A young woman. After she left, he lay there staring at a water stain on the ceiling tile shaped vaguely, like a country he couldn't name, doing something he hadn't done in longer than he wanted to admit, trying to picture someone he'd never actually seen. There wasn't much to picture. A voice, maybe. Hands. That part he was strangely sure of, hands gripping his arms, hauling him across a floor that should have blistered them both. No face. No name. Just the ghost of a grip and a debt. He had no idea how you were even supposed to repay something like that. 3 days later he was home. Glass walls, a river view he never actually looked at, the kind of apartment decorators call clean, and he'd quietly started calling empty somewhere around the 2nd year of living in it alone. And he still hadn't stopped thinking about her. Not dramatically. He told himself that a lot, actually. He just wanted to say thank you. That was normal. That was what a decent person did. He almost believed it too. You've asked me twice now about the building's security footage. Renata didn't look up from her tablet. Should I be worried? I want to know who pulled me out of a burning building, Renata. That's not exactly suspicious. No, but you've also asked twice about the woman who runs the design studio on 3. A beat. That part's a little suspicious. He didn't answer. Mostly because she wasn't wrong, and he hated it when she wasn't wrong. The building had been in his family 2 generations, his grandfather's, then his father's, his own for all of 8 months now, since the funeral. He hadn't asked for any of it, not the renovation headaches, not the tenant complaints, not the meetings about fire suppression systems that had apparently failed spectacularly on the one night it actually mattered. If he was honest, and he tried to be mostly with himself, less often out loud, he'd never wanted the building at all. It came to him the way inheritance always does. Less a gift, more a weight somebody hands you and calls an honor. Lately, that weight had taken on a strange new shape. A design studio, 3rd floor, a name the fire department report had somehow spelled 2 different ways in the same paragraph. Camila Duarte. Renata slid the tablet across without being asked. 3rd floor. Runs the studio with 2 other designers. She's the one who called it in, and the one who went back up for you instead of waiting for the trucks. Tiago looked at the name longer than the information strictly required. Set something up, he said. I want to thank her in person. You could send flowers. I'm not sending flowers. He didn't dig into why that felt so wrong, just that it did. Flowers were something you sent to close a door, and he wasn't sure yet this was a door he wanted shut. He told himself it'd take 5 minutes. Walk in, say what any decent person says after something like that. Thank you, I owe you my life, let me know if you ever need anything. Walk back out, debt settled, life back to its normal, manageable shape. He didn't believe it either, standing outside the studio at 6 that evening, watching her through the glass before she noticed him. She was bent over a drafting table, sleeves shoved up, a pencil forgotten behind one ear, saying something that made the guy next to her laugh out loud. He hadn't expected her to be ordinary. That was the part that threw him. Somewhere in the smoke-fogged edges of his memory, he'd built her into something almost mythic. A voice, a grip, a debt with no face attached. And here she was, laughing over blueprints, scuffed sneakers, entirely disarmingly human. He knocked before he could talk himself out of it. She looked up and something shifted in her face, recognition, or the start of it, though she couldn't have actually seen him before, just his weight, his ragged breathing in a room that was trying to kill them both. Can I help you? Professional, a little guarded, the way anyone gets, stranger in the doorway after hours. I think it's the other way around. His voice came out steadier than he felt. I think you helped me, 4 nights ago, 4th floor. Her pencil stopped mid-line. She set it down slow, and for a second neither of them said anything, just the hum of the new emergency lighting they'd installed since the fire, and that particular silence of 2 people realizing they already share something they've never once said out loud. You're the laptop guy, she said finally, and something in her voice, half relief, half disbelief, cracked the tension just enough that they both actually breathed. Tiago, but yes, the laptop guy. She almost smiled. Almost. And he caught himself hoping, more than he'd admit even to himself, that whatever this turned into, it wasn't going to be over in 5 minutes. So, she set the pencil down properly this time, like she needed both hands free for whatever came next. You came all the way down here for a 5-minute thank you? Word travels fast. Renata called ahead, something about wanting to confirm a good time. Camilla's eyebrow went up, which is a strange thing to arrange for something that's supposedly quick. He felt caught, and that annoyed him more than it should have. He wasn't a man who got caught at things, usually. She's efficient, occasionally to a fault. Sure. She clearly didn't buy it, but let it slide, nodding at the stool across the drafting table instead. You want to sit, or is this a doorway kind of thank you? He sat. The stool wobbled, one leg shorter than the rest, probably something the renovation crew hadn't gotten to, and strangely he liked that. It made the room feel less like property he technically owned, and more like somewhere a person actually worked. I don't really know how to do this properly, he admitted, and the admission surprised him more than it seemed to surprise her. There isn't really a script for thanks for not letting me die in a fire. She said it lightly. Something moved underneath it anyway. The memory, maybe, of how close it had actually come. Coffee? Sure. She poured 2 cups from a machine that had clearly seen better decades. He noticed things he hadn't meant to notice. The calluses along the side of her index finger, drafting pencil calluses, hours of pressure worn into the same spot. Sleeves shoved up past her elbows, though the room wasn't warm at all. You run this place alone? He nodded toward the blueprints scattered across the table, sketches of an open rooftop layered over older, stiffer architectural plans. With Anna and Felipe, when they're not off arguing about paint swatches somewhere. She slid a mug toward him. It's small, it works. What's this? He tapped the sketch nearest him. Curved lines, open space, nothing that matched any blueprint he'd been drowning in for 8 months. She hesitated. Just barely. Like she hadn't meant to leave it out where a client, landlord technically, though neither of them had said the word yet, could see it. Nothing. A concept. For the rooftop, if it ever gets a real renovation instead of another patch job. Show me. It's not a real project, nobody asked for it. I'm asking. Something in how he said it made her actually look at him, not the laptop guy, not whoever's nephew she'd assumed he was, just him, like she was recalculating something on the spot. It's an open terrace. She pulled the sketch closer, close enough that their hands nearly touched over the paper. Skylights instead of a solid roof over the center. Some kind of low-maintenance garden, nothing needing full sun. Did it on a slow afternoon, mostly because the current roof's a disaster and I got bored imagining something better. It's good. He meant it. There was a restraint in the sketch, a sense that not every corner needed filling, that reminded him, uncomfortably, of what the building used to feel like before 3 different renovation firms tried to sand it down into looking like everywhere else downtown. You don't have to say that. I don't say things I don't mean. A beat. Quieter. Ask around. Getting a compliment out of me is apparently difficult. That got something out of her. Not a laugh, not quite. More a huff of air through the nose that softened her whole face for half a second. Noted. They talked longer than either one planned. He asked about the studio, how long she'd run it. Why design over something with an actual predictable paycheck? She asked carefully what it was like inheriting a building instead of choosing one, and he answered more honestly than he meant to. Something about weight, obligation, the specific loneliness of running a thing you never wanted. Neither of them brought up the fire directly. It sat under everything anyway, the way a bruise sits under skin, invisible until someone presses in the wrong spot. The coffee went cold. Neither noticed until the studio's other lights cut out on a timer, leaving just the desk lamp between them. Camilla glanced at her watch, and her face did something close to actual surprise. It's been an hour. Has it? He hadn't checked, hadn't wanted to. You said 5 minutes. I lied. No apology in it, just fact. And something about how flatly he said it made her laugh for real this time. Quick, unguarded, the kind of laugh that seemed to catch her as off guard as it caught him. I should get back. She didn't move. Anna's going to ask questions if I'm here past 8. What kind of questions? The kind where she decides something happened that didn't. Her eyes found his, steady, testing something. Nothing happened. No. The word came out slower than it should have, like it cost him something. Nothing happened. Neither one moved to end it. The lamp buzzed faintly, the only sound left besides their own breathing. and for 1 second, no more, something passed between them that neither was ready to put a name to. His eyes dropped to her hands wrapped around the cold mug. Hers flicked just as fast, to the pale scar along his forearm where the ER had cut his burned sleeve away. "I should go," he said, standing before he did something he wasn't ready for. "You should." She didn't get up to walk him out. At the door he stopped, hand on the frame, turning back like there was more he meant to say. There was several things, actually, none of which belonged in a 5-minute thank you that had somehow become an hour. "I'll be around," he said instead. "The renovation. You'll probably see more of me than you'd like." Doubt that. Something in how quietly she said it told him she meant the opposite. He left with his coffee cold and untouched on the table, and the strange unfamiliar sense that he'd just walked out of something a lot more complicated than gratitude. He came back Tuesday, then Thursday. By the second week, Camilla had stopped pretending to be surprised when the studio door opened at some odd hour, and it was him instead of a client. "You know," she said, not looking up from the balsa wood model she was gluing, badly, one corner already crooked. "Most landlords email if they need to check on a floor." "I'm not most landlords." Tiago dropped a folder on the corner of her table. Actual paperwork this time, second floor plans, a legitimate excuse, and they both knew it was mostly that. "Contractor needs sign-off on the load-bearing wall by the stairwell. Figured you'd want input since you're the one who has to live next to whatever they do to it." "I don't have to live next to it, I work next to it." Semantics. Very important semantics. She looked up at him, brief, assessing. "You could have emailed the plans." Could have, but didn't. No. He offered nothing else, and she didn't push, though something in the set of his mouth told her he knew exactly what she was doing by not letting it go easy. She'd started noticing things about him over these 2 weeks. Small things, the kind you only catch from repeated exposure. He rolled up his sleeves before sitting, left one first always. He read blueprints the way some people read novels, slow, absorbed, like the lines meant something past code compliance. He asked her opinion on things he obviously didn't need her opinion on, and she'd started answering anyway, because pretending to mind had gotten exhausting somewhere around visit 4. "This," she said, tapping the plan, "is a problem. You can't move that wall without rerouting electrical for the whole floor." "I know, that's why I brought it to you instead of just signing off. You could have said that instead of the whole load-bearing wall production. Where's the fun in that?" She looked up properly then, and something in his expression, a little too pleased with himself, a little too aware of how thin the excuse had been, got a laugh out of her before she could stop it, short, unwilling. She smothered it fast by grabbing her pencil. "You're ridiculous." "Been called worse." "By who?" "Renata, daily, roughly." He leaned against the table's edge, closer than the room really required. Close enough she caught cedar, something clean underneath, nothing like the cologne most men his age drowned themselves in. "She thinks I use the renovation as an excuse to come down here." Her pencil stopped. "Does she?" "She's not wrong if that's the question." No games in it this time, and the shift in his tone caught her more off guard than the words did. "I have 3 assistants who could handle wall approvals, Camilla. I come myself." She didn't answer right away. The quiet stretched a beat too long to be accidental, and neither of them moved to be the one who broke it. "That's a lot to admit for a man standing next to a load-bearing wall," she finally said, keeping it light, because the alternative felt like too much for a Tuesday afternoon. Aware of that. "You could take it back." "Don't take things back." A pause. Quieter. "Character flaw. Ask Renata." The laugh came easier this time, less guarded, and she let it happen, watched something in his shoulders ease in response, like her laughing had cost him some tension he hadn't realized he was holding. The days after fell into something like a rhythm, though neither called it that out loud. He'd show up with some fragment of an excuse, a paint sample needing her eye, a contractor question that could have waited a week, a permit issue anybody at his company could have handled without leaving their desk. She stopped pretending the excuses held up. He stopped bothering to make them convincing. "Tile," he said one afternoon, dropping 2 swatches on her table, no preamble. "Lobby. Which one?" She held them to the light, aware of him watching her instead of the tiles. "This one." The other's too cold for a space that's supposed to feel welcoming. That's what I thought. Then why ask? Because I wanted an excuse to come down here, and apparently I've run out of subtlety. No embarrassment in it, watching her reaction like it was almost a dare. You could just say that, skip the tiles. Could. He didn't leave. She didn't send him off. The silence between them had gotten comfortable in a way that unsettled her a little. How fast it had stopped feeling strange. Their hands brushed once, reaching for the same sketch. An accident, technically, though neither pulled back as fast as an accident usually demands. His fingers were warm, rougher than she'd expected for someone who lived most of his life in meetings, and for a second neither said anything, the moment stretching thin between them until Camilla cleared her throat and reached for her coffee instead, an excuse mostly to put actual space back between them. "Get that tile ordered," she said a little too fast. "Right." He didn't move right away, and when he finally did, it wasn't toward the door. One step closer instead, close enough she had to tilt her head to hold his eyes. "Camilla, don't." Wasn't going to say anything. "You were thinking something. I think a lot of things." His voice had dropped, quieter than the room needed. "Most of them, I keep to myself." "Most?" He didn't answer that. Picked up the tile samples instead, tucked them under one arm, and for a second she thought that was it. Another retreat, another thread left hanging the way they'd both gotten so practiced at leaving things. At the door, though, he paused. The way he always did lately, like leaving her studio, required some ritual reluctance he hadn't quite figured out how to skip. "Tile's a good call," he said. "So was pulling me out of that building, for what it's worth. Probably the best decision either of us made all year." He left before she could answer. She sat there after, coffee gone cold and forgotten, his voice still sitting in her head, wondering exactly how much longer either of them could keep pretending this was about tile. "This is technically a safety violation," Camilla said, stepping over a coil of exposed cable, "bringing me up here before the inspection's even done. I own the building. Pretty sure that means I get to violate my own safety code." "That is not how any of this works. Tell the contractor that. He's the one who left the door unlocked." Tiago held it open, and she ducked under his arm into open air. The city spread out below in a wide, uneven sprawl of light, office towers blinking at random, the traffic noise softened by height into something almost gentle. The roof was still mostly a construction site. Plywood over exposed beams, a stack of steel framing waiting on skylights that hadn't shown up yet. But somebody, probably him, had cleared a space near the edge and dragged out 2 folding chairs that looked completely out of place against all the mess. "You did this on purpose," she said, nodding at the chairs. "I did." "Why?" "You designed this space before it existed, figured you should see it before it turns into something else." No deflection this time, none of the usual wrapping he put around anything that sounded too much like feeling. "Also, the contractors scared of heights won't come up here past 6. It's quiet." She sat, knees pulled up, and for a while neither said anything. Just wind moving through the exposed beams, the city doing whatever cities do at that hour, indifferent to 2 people sitting in an unfinished terrace with an entire skyline for company. "Strange," she said eventually. "Designing something and not knowing if you'll actually see it finished." "You'll see it finished." "You don't know that." "I own the building, Camilla. I can at least promise you a rooftop." Something in his voice said he wasn't fully joking, that the promise carried more weight than either of them was ready to name. She looked over. City light caught the sharp line of his jaw, and the tiredness he usually hid better sat plainly in his shoulders tonight. "You don't like it. The building." He didn't answer right away, and that told her more than a quick answer would have. "Don't dislike it. It was just never really mine to want or not want. My grandfather built the company out of nothing. My father ran it because it was expected of him. Then he died, and it landed on me, the way inheritance does. Nobody asks if you want it. Nobody ever asks." "That sounds lonely." "It is." Flat. No self-pity in it, more like a fact he'd stopped arguing with years ago. "Most of my life is managing something I never chose, surrounded by people whose entire job is agreeing with me. You're the first person in a long time who told me a wall couldn't move and actually meant it. Didn't care if I wanted to hear it or not. Low bar. You'd be surprised how few people clear it. The wind shifted, cooler up here, and she pulled her jacket tighter, suddenly aware of how close he'd drifted without either of them deciding it. Close enough she could hear him breathing. Close enough the space between the two chairs had quit meaning anything. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded, watching her with that particular attention he usually saved for blueprints, wall calculations, apparently her too now. "Why do you keep coming down to the studio? And don't say tile." Quiet for a moment. Long enough she thought he'd deflect again, fold the question back into something safer. He didn't. "Because for 8 months I've been the guy signing checks for a building that used to mean something to my family, and now just feels like a spreadsheet with a roof on it," he said. "Then you dragged me out of a fire I don't even remember, and every time I'm around you the building stops being a spreadsheet. It's just a place with people in it. You made it that again." She didn't answer right away. The honesty of it hit harder than any of his usual deflections ever had, precisely because there was no deflection in it at all. "That's not about tile. No. You should have led with that. Would you have believed me?" She actually thought about it. Wasn't sure. Probably not. "That's why I brought tile." She laughed, soft, a little unsteady, and something about the sound made him turn toward her fully, every bit of his usual careful distance gone from his face. Neither spoke for a moment. The city hummed below. Wind moved through the beams overhead, low and constant, and for once it felt like it belonged to the two of them instead of the mess around it. "My sister died 4 years ago. Unprompted, quieter than before. Car accident. Nothing dramatic. She was just crossing a street at the wrong second. That's why I went back up that night. I don't even think about it anymore. I can't walk past someone who might need help. Not since her. Some part of me's probably spent 4 years trying to save the person I couldn't." He didn't say anything at first. Reached over instead, slow enough she could have pulled away if she wanted, and covered her hand on the arm of the chair. She didn't pull away. "I'm sorry." Simple. No performance in it. "I know." Her fingers curled slightly under his. An answer she didn't have words for yet. "It's why I couldn't leave you in there. Wasn't really about you, not at first. And now?" She looked at him, half his face in shadow from the city light, and felt something settle into place that had been circling for weeks, unnamed, insistent. Now it's different. Neither moved for a long moment, the admission sitting between them, too big, too fragile to rush. His thumb moved once against her knuckles, barely anything at all, and she felt it everywhere, the whole rooftop narrowing down to that one point of contact. "Camilla." "Don't." Softer this time. None of the deflection from before. "Not yet. I'm not ready for whatever that sentence turns into." "Okay." He didn't let go of her hand. "Take your time." They stayed like that until the wind turned properly cold, his hand over hers, the unfinished terrace holding them in a silence that felt for the first time since the fire like a beginning instead of an aftermath. Renata found him in his office 2 days after the rooftop, a folder in her hand that she set down carefully, like it might go off if she dropped it too hard. "You need to see this before the lawyers do." Her voice had none of its usual dryness. "It came up during the insurance review for the fire, old maintenance records. Goes back to your father's time running the building." Tiago didn't look up from his screen. "It's a building, Renata. Old records exist. That's generally how buildings work. Read it." Something in how she said it made him actually set the pen down. The report was dense, bureaucratic, the kind of document built to bury anything important under 12 pages of nothing. But the relevant section, once he found it, was short enough to read twice before it fully landed. The fire alarm system on the 4th floor had failed a routine inspection 18 months before the fire. His father had signed off on a deferred repair instead of an immediate one, citing budget constraints. During a fiscal year, Tiago mostly remembered as the year his father stopped talking about anything at dinner besides quarterly earnings. It didn't fail randomly. He was on the 3rd read now, like the words might rearrange into something less damning if he stared long enough. It failed because somebody decided it wasn't worth fixing yet. Your father decided that. 18 months before he died, before you'd even taken over. Doesn't matter, my name's on the deed now. It matters because you weren't the one who made the call, and right now you're blaming yourself for a decision made before you had any authority to stop it. Careful now. Her keep him from doing something rash voice, which meant she already suspected he might. This isn't your fault, Tiago. Camilla almost died because my father wanted to save money. Flat, but something under the flatness had gone jagged enough that Renata dropped the argument. You need to tell her, she said instead, before she hears it some other way. Insurance investigations don't stay quiet long. He didn't sleep that night. Went to the studio the next morning, instead of waiting around for some excuse to bring him there the normal way. Camilla looked up from her desk, and whatever she saw on his face made her set her pencil down immediately. What happened? Fire alarm on 4 failed an inspection 18 months before the fire. No preamble. He decided somewhere on the walk over that softening, it would only make it worse. My father knew. Deferred the repair instead of fixing it. Budget. The quiet that followed went on longer than either of them was comfortable with. Her face had gone carefully blank, the kind of blank that takes real effort to hold, and some part of him wished she'd just get angry instead. Anger, at least, he'd know what to do with. So the reason I had to drag you out of a burning building, she said finally, voice too controlled, is that your family decided a working alarm wasn't worth the line item. Yes. Why tell me now? Guilt? Some kind of penance? Because you deserve the truth, and because I'd rather you be angry at me for saying it than find out from an insurance report and start wondering what else I hadn't said. He meant it, though it came out rougher than intended, old defensiveness surfacing despite himself. I'm not angry at you. Too fast, which told him it wasn't quite true. I don't know what I am right now. I keep trying to separate you from the building, from the company, from your father's spreadsheet math, and right now that's genuinely hard. I understand. Do you? Sharper now, the anger she'd just denied finding its way up anyway. Because from where I'm standing, all of it, the coffee, the rooftop, everything, happened because your family's building nearly killed me. I don't know how to look at any of it now without that sitting underneath. It doesn't change what's actually happened between us. Doesn't it? She stood, put real distance between them for the first time in weeks, and he felt that loss sharper than he expected. I keep asking myself if this was ever about you, or if I just got attached to whoever happened to be attached to the last thing that almost killed me. I don't have an answer, and it's making me feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. I pulled a stranger out of a fire and then fell into whatever this is with the person connected to why that fire got so bad in the first place. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, the first real crack in her composure since the day they'd met. So, forgive me if I need a minute to work out what that actually means. He didn't argue, didn't reach for her, though everything in him wanted to. Take whatever time you need. I will. Something conflicted, raw, unreadable crossed her face. I need you to go, not forever. Just today. He left. The walk back to his own building felt longer than it had any right to, every step away from her feeling less like distance and more like something quietly cracking in the space between them. 5 days passed without a word. Camilla found herself counting them without meaning to, the way you count anything you're trying hard not to think about, which is to say obsessively, against your own will. You've reorganized the supply closet twice this week, Anna said, not looking up from her own desk. Usually that means something's wrong. I'm being productive. You're avoiding something. Different thing entirely. Anna glanced over finally, and whatever she saw made her set her pencil down. This about the landlord? There's no this. Camilla kept her eyes on the shelf she'd rearranged for the third time. Cans of spray adhesive that didn't need alphabetizing by any reasonable standard. He hasn't been by. 5 days. I'm not counting. You just gave me the number. I didn't ask. Anna's voice stayed gentle, which somehow made it worse. For what it's worth, you don't look relieved he's gone. Camilla didn't answer that. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't require admitting more than she was ready to. Not to Anna. Not to herself. Definitely not out loud on a Tuesday afternoon with clients due in 20 minutes. The truth, if she let herself sit with it more than a few seconds at a time, was that the studio felt different without him in it. Quieter, sure, but wrong quiet. The kind of silence that used to just be silence, before she'd gotten used to the sound of him walking in with some see-through excuse and a stool that wobbled under his weight. She'd caught herself listening for the door, hated that she was listening for the door. Across town, Tiago wasn't doing much better, though he'd have denied it to anyone who asked. Nobody was asking except Renata, who asked constantly, and didn't much care whether he wanted to answer. "You've read the same paragraph of that contract 4 times. She set down a coffee he hadn't ordered. "Either it's the most fascinating clause in contract law, or you're not actually reading it. I'm reading it. You're staring at it. Not the same thing." She sat across from him, uninvited, something she only did when she'd decided a conversation was happening whether he liked it or not. "How much longer are you giving her space before you actually check if that's still what she wants?" "She asked me to leave, Renata. Fairly clear instruction, as instructions go." "She asked you to leave that day, not the rest of your life." She leaned in slightly. "You've been miserable 5 days straight, I'm allowed to notice." "I'm not miserable. You rearranged your whole calendar to avoid contractor meetings on the building. You hate delegating those. You've delegated 3 of them this week," eyebrow up, daring him to argue. Not the behavior of a fine man. He didn't argue, mostly because she wasn't wrong, and arguing with Renata when she wasn't wrong had never once gone well for him. "What if she needed distance because I'm the actual problem?" he said finally, quieter than he meant to. "Not the building, not my father. Me. What if all of it, the fire, the alarm, the whole mess, just proves I'm the kind of person things happen around, and she's smart enough to get out before it happens again? That's the most self-pitying thing I've heard out of you in 8 months, and I include the standing desk week. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. Different thing. Worse thing, actually, since realism at least has the decency to occasionally be accurate." She stood, gathered her tablet. "Go see her. No excuse this time, just go." He didn't go that day or the next. Some mix of pride and genuine uncertainty kept him planted on his own side of the city. In the end, it was an accident that put them back in the same room, the kind of accident that, looking back, felt like it had been coming the whole time. The building's near-finished lobby had a soft opening scheduled for returning tenants, a small gathering to mark the renovation reaching its last stretch, and neither had bothered checking if the other would show. Camilla came for Anna, mostly, the studio's sake. Professional obligation, wearing the costume of choice. Tiago came because it was his building, his name on the invitation, and skipping his own event would have needed an explanation he wasn't ready to give anyone. They spotted each other across the room almost simultaneously, and something passed between them that the noise and the crowd couldn't quite absorb. 5 days of careful distance folding, briefly, back into the same charged quiet that had first settled over them weeks ago in her studio. "You came," she said, once he'd crossed to where she stood, a glass of wine in her hand she hadn't touched once. "It's my building." "That's not what I meant." "I know." He held her gaze a beat longer than the noise around them made comfortable. "Wasn't sure you'd want me to." "I don't know what I want." Quieter now, the crowd fading into something neither of them was actually hearing. "That's been the problem for 5 days, trying to work out what's real and what's just on proximity, gratitude. Everything that happened because of the fire. I can't separate it out clean enough to trust my own answer." "Maybe it doesn't need separating." A pause. "Maybe it's allowed to just be all of it at once." She looked at him a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes he couldn't quite read, and for a second he thought she might actually say it, whatever she'd been sitting on all week. Instead, someone called her name from across the room. A tenant, a question about the new elevator panel, and the moment broke before either of them could do anything with it. "I should go," he said. "It's fine." She hesitated at the edge of the crowd, glanced back once before it swallowed her, and the look on her face told him this wasn't over. Not close. Just paused, the way 5 days of silence had been paused, not resolved. Both of them circling the same unfinished sentence, neither quite ready yet to finish it. She went to find him 3 days later, not the other way around, which surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. He was up on the roof alone, the skylights finally in place, throwing long geometric shadows across the finished terrace in the late afternoon light. "Contractor said you've been coming up here every day." She stepped through the access door. Alone. He turned, and something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, relief, both tangled together, that tightened her chest before either of them said another word. "It's done. Figured it was worth seeing without an excuse this time. No tile emergencies. None left. I've officially run out of renovation problems that require your professional opinion." A pause, something wry underneath it. "Turns out I just like it up here now. Also, it reminds me of you, which is its own problem considering." She walked further out, running a hand along a railing that hadn't existed the last time she'd stood in this exact spot. Soft, filtered light through the skylights now, instead of raw beams and construction dust. "It's beautiful. You actually built it. You designed it. I just signed the checks. That's not nothing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." They stood there a moment, the city sounds muted the way they always were up this high, and Camilla found herself circling the thing she'd actually come to say, unsure how to start without it coming out wrong. "I've spent 3 days thinking about what I said at the opening." She finally got it out. "About not being able to tell what's real from what's just proximity, gratitude, everything tangled up in the fire. And I think I was scared." She turned to face him properly. "Not of you being connected to the fire, of how much I've come to feel connected to you regardless of it. It's easier to blame the fire, honestly. Easier than admitting I'd probably feel exactly this way about you even if we'd met somewhere completely ordinary. No burning building involved at all." Something shifted in his face, careful hope replacing the guarded neutrality he'd been holding since she'd walked in. "You don't have to say that just because—" "I'm not saying it because of anything except that it's true." Steadier than she expected, given how unsteady she felt saying it out loud. "I've been angry at your father's decision, angry at the whole situation. I've never actually been angry at you, not really. Even when I said I needed space, I just needed to know if what I felt was real or just leftover adrenaline wearing a disguise. And now I know it's real. Simple. No drama in it, just fact. The same way he'd once told her he didn't say things he didn't mean. Scares me a little, but it's real." He crossed the space between them then, closing the distance she'd kept for 3 days without either of them ever calling it distance, and stopped close enough she had to tip her head back slightly to hold his eyes. "There's something you should know too." Quieter now. "This building, the company, all of it. 8 months I treated it like a burden nobody asked if I wanted. And somewhere in the last few weeks, without meaning to, I started actually wanting to be here. Doing this, not obligation. You made it feel like something worth showing up for. That's a lot to put on one rooftop conversation. Aware of that." A small, unguarded smile, rare enough on him that it still caught her off guard every time. "Told you. Character flaw. Never do things halfway." She laughed, soft, a little breathless, and the sound seemed to strip away whatever caution either of them had left. His hand came up slow, giving her every chance to step back, and settled against the side of her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Camilla. Just her name. No deflection folded into it this time. No unfinished sentence trailing off somewhere safer. "Don't—" Out of habit more than any real resistance, and he caught the shift in her voice immediately, something hopeful flickering across his face. "You don't mean that anymore." "No." She closed the last of the distance herself. "I don't." The kiss that followed was slow, careful, the kind that comes after weeks of circling instead of rushing. His hand still at her face, hers curled into the front of his shirt, both of them steadying each other rather than colliding. When they broke apart, foreheads still touching, neither moved to step back. "For the record," she said, a little unsteady, "this is significantly more complicated than tile." "For the record," he said, "I never once actually cared about the tile." Below them, the city carried on, Entirely indifferent to what had just happened on a rooftop terrace, neither of them had expected would become the place where 5 days of silence finally broke into something neither one could take back. 3 weeks after the rooftop, Renata called a meeting Tiago hadn't put on his own calendar, in a conference room he almost never used, with a folder on the table noticeably thicker than the usual budget review. "What is this?" He sat down across from her. Camilla's absence from his morning was already sitting oddly in his chest. She'd left early for a client meeting and he'd noticed, the way he noticed most things about her now that he never used to register at all. "Restructuring proposal. For the company." Renata slid it over, no ceremony. "You've spent weeks talking about actually wanting to run this place instead of just holding the title, so I put together what that could look like." He opened it, skimming pages he half expected to be routine, until he hit a section near the back that wasn't routine at all. A proposal to divest 3 of the company's least essential holdings, freeing up capital, freeing up time, freeing him from a sprawling portfolio his father had built more out of ambition than any actual care. "You want me to sell off 1/3 of the company. I want you to keep what actually means something to you and stop drowning in the rest." No dry humor in her voice this time, unusually direct. 8 months you've treated every single property like a burden, because you inherited the whole mess in one shot with no room to breathe. Trim it down. Then maybe you get to actually choose what you keep, instead of just managing whatever landed on you. He looked at the list again. A shopping mall 2 hours out of the city he'd never once set foot in, a logistics warehouse he couldn't have found on a map, 3 commercial properties that had never been anything but line items and obligation. And at the bottom, circled in Renata's own handwriting, the one property he'd never once considered giving up. The building, Camilla's building, his grandfather's building. "I keep this one," he tapped the circled entry. "Obviously, that's why I circled it." A small, knowing look. "You've been different since the fire, Tiago. Better, mostly. I'd like to see you build a life around whatever's actually making you better, instead of managing whatever's wearing you down." He found Camilla that evening, later than usual, sketching something on a fresh sheet she covered the second he walked in, a small smile giving away that whatever it wasn't meant for him yet. "Secret project?" He settled onto the wobbly stool neither of them had ever bothered fixing. "Maybe." She didn't uncover it. "Why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Like you did something reckless, and you're still deciding whether to be proud of it or nervous." She set the pencil down, gave him the full attention she'd started reserving for whenever he showed up with something real, instead of another manufactured excuse. "I'm restructuring the company, selling off most of what I never wanted in the first place, keeping this one." He paused. "Maybe 2 others that actually matter, instead of just sitting on a balance sheet." Her expression moved through several things at once, surprise, then something more careful, cautious, the same look he remembered from the day she learned about his father's decision. "Big move, for a building that almost killed both of us." "That's exactly why I'm keeping it." He reached across, covering her hand the way he had that night on the roof, except there was no hesitation in it this time, nothing tentative at all. "It's the only thing my father left me that actually turned into something good. I'm not selling the place where I met you, just because the history's complicated. The history's part of why it's worth keeping. You could have told me this over coffee, didn't need the whole reveal." "I know." A small, unguarded smile. "Wanted you to understand what it actually meant." Coffee felt insufficient for the occasion. She turned her hand over under his, laced their fingers together in a motion so natural it barely registered as a decision. "You're really doing this, simplifying your whole life around one building, and, apparently, one designer." Said like that, it sounds a little insane. A little. Her voice had gone soft in a way that undercut the word completely. "I like it anyway." "Hoped you would." He hesitated, something else sitting behind his eyes now. She'd learned over these weeks to recognize the particular quiet that came right before he said something he actually meant. "Camilla, I don't know how to do the easy version of this. Never been good at easy. But I want you in whatever comes next, not as an extension of gratitude, not leftover adrenaline from a fire neither of us signed up to survive." Just because you're the first thing in years that made this building, this life, feel worth showing up for. She went quiet a moment, something bright and unguarded crossing her face, and when she finally spoke, every trace of the careful distance she used to keep against exactly this kind of admission was gone from her voice. I want that too. Simple. Have for a while. Just didn't know how to say it, without sounding like I was still untangling the fire from the feelings. And now? Now I think they were never actually separate. A small shrug. Maybe they weren't supposed to be. He leaned across the table then, closing the distance slow, giving her every chance to pull back the way he always did, and she didn't. Met him halfway instead, her free hand coming up to his jaw as the kiss deepened into something steadier than the one on the rooftop. Less like a beginning now, more like a foundation. When they broke apart, she was smiling in a way he'd rarely seen on her. Unguarded, a little disbelieving, like she was still catching up to whatever shape this was taking between them. So, she glanced at the covered sketch still sitting between them. Since we're apparently doing full transparency now, it's a redesign for your office. Started it 3 days ago. Don't really know why, except I couldn't stop thinking about how much you hate the one you've got. Something warm, slightly stunned, crossed his face. You've been redesigning my office in secret. Don't make it weird. Not making it weird. Pretty sure it's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me, and it involves floor plans. He laughed, low, genuine, and pulled her back toward him before she could argue the point. Show me. She did eventually. Just not for another 20 minutes. Both of them, for once, entirely willing to let something take longer than it strictly needed to. The call came Thursday morning, 3 months after the rooftop, while Camilla pinned fabric samples to the studio wall, half listening to Anna argue with a supplier in the next room. My aunt. Tiago walked in without his usual knock, a tightness in his voice she'd only heard once before, the day of the insurance report. My father's sister. She's contesting the restructuring, says selling off half the portfolio dishonors his legacy. Camilla set down the pin. Can she actually stop it? Legally, no. Company was mine outright the day he died. But she's threatening to go public. Papers say I'm dismantling 3 generations of family work over a woman I've known 4 months. Flat, though something underneath had gone raw in that same way she recognized from the alarm conversation. She's not entirely wrong about the timeline, if I'm honest. 4 months isn't long, not for something this size. Do you believe her? That this is reckless? He didn't answer right away, and the pause sat there longer than either of them wanted. I believe 4 months is fast. I believe most people would tell me to wait, be sure, protect the company the way my father would have wanted. I believe all of that. None of it changes what I actually want, which scares me a little, honestly. That's not really an answer. No. He admitted it plainly. It's not. She studied him a long moment, fabric samples forgotten behind her, and felt something old rise in her chest, the same fear that had kept her circling this exact conversation for weeks after the alarm report, that everything between them was built on something too fast, too strange, too tangled up in fire and survival to trust all the way. Maybe she's right to worry. Quiet. Maybe we both moved faster than either of us should have. I pulled you out of a fire, and 3 months later you're restructuring your whole company and I'm redesigning your office. That's not exactly a normal timeline for anything. Normal was never really on the table for us. He crossed the studio, stopped close enough she had to tilt her head to hold his eyes. I could wait, slow it down, prove to my aunt, to everyone, that I'm being careful about all this. But every time I think about doing that, all I can think about is how much time we've already lost being careful. 5 days after the alarm report, 3 days after the opening, both of us circling the same fear instead of just saying what we actually want. And what do you actually want? You, this building, this life, exactly the mess it's turning into, complicated history, impatient aunt, all of it. He took her hand, laced their fingers together with the same unhesitating certainty he'd had that day in the studio. Nothing tentative left in it at all. I'm not doing this slowly to prove a point to people who never had to survive what we survived. I've known what I want since the rooftop. Probably longer, if I'm being honest with myself. Her throat tightened. something warm and frightening rising with it. That's a big thing to say in the middle of a fabric swatch argument. Aware of the timing, a small unguarded smile. Told you, character flaw. She laughed despite the tightness in her chest, despite a furious aunt threatening headlines, despite everything still sitting unresolved around them. So what happens with your aunt? She can say whatever she wants to the papers. I'm not slowing my life down because she's uncomfortable with its pace, said with a certainty that actually surprised her, given how careful he'd always been about the company's reputation, how much weight he usually gave to appearance and family expectation. 8 months I lived like the building, the company, all of it, was a burden I had to carry carefully so nobody got hurt by my mistakes. I'm done with that. If loving you quickly is a mistake, it's the first one in years that's actually felt like mine. The word landed before either of them seemed ready for it. Loving. And the whole studio narrowed down to the sound of it, the weight of it. 3 months of circling, collapsing suddenly into something neither could take back or pretend they hadn't heard. Say that again. Quieter than she meant it. I love you. Plainly this time. No accident in it. Watching her face for whatever she'd do with it. I love you, and I'm not interested in slowing that down for anyone's comfort. Not my aunt's. Not the version of me that spent 8 months terrified of wanting anything too much. She didn't answer in words, closed the distance instead, hands finding the front of his shirt, and kissed him with none of the rooftop's careful slowness, none of the studio confession's tentative steadiness, just certainty, immediate and unguarded, the kind of kiss that answered the question before she'd managed to say it out loud. I love you too. When they broke apart, forehead against his. Have for longer than I probably should admit, given the timeline your aunt's so worried about. Let her worry. Let her worry, Camilla agreed, laughing softly against his shoulder. They took the rooftop that evening, the finished terrace catching the day's last gold light, same railing, same skylights, same city sprawled out below, indifferent to everything that had happened since the fire first threw them together. Tiago pulled 2 chairs to the edge, the same folding chairs from months back, worn now in a way that felt earned rather than temporary. 4 months ago I didn't even know your name. She settled in beside him, his hand finding hers automatically now, no hesitation left in either of them. Now I can't imagine a version of my life where I never went back up those stairs. I think about that a lot, how close we both came to never happening at all, if you'd listened to instinct and run instead of climbing, if the alarm had worked the way it was supposed to and none of this ever needed to happen. Do you wish it hadn't? The fire, if you could go back and fix the alarm. He took the question seriously, watching the city lights flicker on one by one as the evening deepened. I wish nobody got hurt. I wish my father had made a different call 18 months before he died, but I don't wish we'd never met if that's the real question. Some part of me would rather have survived a fire to find you than lived some safe, uneventful life that never once put us in the same building. That's either the most romantic thing you've ever said or deeply unhinged. With me, it's usually both. He turned to face her fully, city light catching the same sharp line of his jaw that had first caught her attention on this exact roof months ago. Some fires don't go out, Camilla. I don't think this is one we're meant to walk away from. She leaned into him, the terrace holding them both the way it had that first night, except the silence between them now carried none of the old uncertainty. Just the quiet, settled certainty of 2 people who'd survived something together and kept choosing each other deliberately every day since. Below them, the city carried on the way it always did, entirely unaware that somewhere above its noise and light, 2 people who never should have crossed paths had found, in the wreckage of an ordinary Tuesday night, something that refused to burn out. She almost died to save a stranger. She never expected he'd end up saving the life she didn't know was empty. Some fires don't destroy. They reveal what was always meant to survive. Maybe love was never about the moment they met, but about who they chose to become because of it. Would you have climbed those stairs too? Go ahead and hit that like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And if you want more, might experience it all with no ads, no interruptions, and new stories every single day, the link's in the first pinned comment. Inside, it's a whole other level.